Stay tuned after our feature presentation for
Corrections and Apologies.
Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded, yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles...
Wait a sec. 92?
Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 98 million miles...
Wait, hold on.
Roughly 92 million miles.
Roughly 98 million miles.
92 million miles.
98 million miles.
At a distance of roughly 92 million miles.
98 million miles.
Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles.
98 million miles.
Roughly 92 million miles.
98 million miles.
Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 92 million miles is an utterly insignificant little blue-green planet whose ape-descended...
It was explained to me that the radio show, the TV show, the stage play, the film when it comes out, and the books, the information doesn't always
It's all completely
coincide.
self-contradictory. Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I was introduced to the Hitchhiker's universe, not on a friend's recommendation or a reading list or spotting it on a shelf, but rather by a series of acontextual quotes on the internet. The one that really sold me was the one where the entire battle fleet was swallowed by a small dog. I read and reread certain sections of the first two books, in part because of how funny and unusual they were, and in part because Adams' writing was, to paraphrase how Adams himself described P.G. Wodehouse, musical. His prose flows off the sarcastic Anglophone tongue so naturally, it seems meant to be. Of course, that iconic opening about our utterly insignificant planet stuck with me, but I always thought it was weird that Hitchhikers opens with a factual error. 98 million miles is a little high. Now, I know this was written in a pre-Google time, and let's be real, it's not that kind of a book. But when I found the new illustrated hardcover and discovered that it used the British text instead of an American localization, well, obviously I was getting that. 92 million miles. Okay, someone like me saw fit to finally fix it. I mean, it's still slightly wrong, that number's a little low, but it's closer. Wait, this copy of Fish from the 80s also says 92 million. Okay, I get it. They realized the error all the way back then and fixed it. But this copy of Fish is from the 90s and it's back to 98? Wait, this one's British and this one's American. They've corrected it only in the British versions. But some earlier version of the British text must have had the error, right? It makes no sense to think the American text was changed to a less accurate figure. My hypothesis is that the first British edition said 98 million, which made it into the American copies, and it was revised in later British reprints, but we never got the memo. Finally, the original 1979 British text. 92. Oh my god. Every British edition says 92 million, and every American localization says 98. Why did we change it? What the hell happened? I'm telling the story to give you a glimpse of my feverish, mildly obsessive journey of confusion. I'm quite fond of the Hitchhiker's collection I've amassed. This is not something I normally do. I'm not hugely into the habit of buying multiple redundant copies of the same book. I'm a little surprised there hasn't been more chatter about this discrepancy. If it were buried in the middle of the book, sure, I'd understand, but we're talking about the opening paragraph in a very popular work. I mean, if half of the printed copies of Pride and Prejudice asserted that a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a life, I'd imagine some scholar would have weighed in on that by now. The only way I could imagine a work inviting more scrutiny is if its very title were inconsistent. What has happened? Both Don't Panic and Wikipedia give us an overview of the censorship-driven changes between the British and American versions of Life, the Universe, and Everything. And I've already found one seemingly pointless change in Hitchhiker. What else have they changed? Have I ever really read Hitchhiker? Or has my experience been the equivalent of the Star Wars Special Edition? To answer that question, I ended up reading, side by side, a British and American edition of the book, with the audiobook going for good measure. By pure dumb luck, by comparing a 21st century British edition to the 90s American mass market paperback, I think I actually picked the two versions that have diverged the most. I'm happy to say that, while I found a few dozen differences, I don't feel the need to declare you haven't really read Hitchhiker unless you've read the out-of-print 1911 edition, but what I did find got pretty interesting. To start, we should note that I'm aware of two errors in the original British text. The first one, pointed out by Nemo, is in Chapter 11. The Earth's galactic coordinates in Hitchhiker's lore is Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha. Yet here, Trillian uses the word section.
Just a couple of guys we seem to have picked up in open space, she said. Section ZZ9 plural Z Alpha.
Just a couple of guys we seem to have picked up in open space, she said. Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha.
Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha.
Picked up here in Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha. Wait a minute.
Hey, this is Editing Torin. I just discovered something and I have not even bothered to precisely script this. Okay, I'm lining up all the relevant clips for the video, and when you get to the part where Douglas Adams says Sector ZZ9, the quality of his voice seemed to change almost as if it were looped in from another clip. Now, normally if you're doing an audiobook read, and either the reader or someone in the booth is dissatisfied with the line and you do it again right there, those are pretty easy edits to hide. But if it's an issue that you only discover in post-production when the reader is long gone, then the editor is limited to the material they already have recorded. So the fact that it sounded looped in made me wonder if, in fact, Adams did read it the wrong way, in other words, the section way, because that was all that was available to him in the book he was reading from. And if that were the case, they had to fix it in post. So I went searching, I opened my digital copy of Hitchhikers and Control-F'd it, and it turns out that phrase only appears one other time in the book. So listen to this. Here is the first instance that you've already heard.
Just a couple of guys we seem to have picked up in open space, she said. Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha.
Okay, so did you hear how when he gets to sector, it's almost like the reverb is slightly different? You know, the kind of thing that could just happen from being on a different day or being 2 inches closer to the mic or whatever. So here it is from later in the book.
Oh yeah, said Zaphod, those couple of guys. We picked them up in Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha.
All right, so now I'm going to play them together. So quick warning, you're going to hear a couple seconds of audio chaos followed by it syncing up.
Oh, yeah. Just a couple of guys who seem to have picked up in open space, she said. We picked them up in Sector ZZ9 plural Z Alpha.
I could not ask for something closer to a literal smoking gun than this. Now, you might have heard that slight echo. That's because I'm doing this in my video editor instead of an audio editor, and I can only align clips to the closest frame, so they are off by a fraction of a second. Although, ironically, that actually makes it sound more like the same thing, whereas if it had been truly perfectly aligned, you wouldn't have heard two voices, you would have just heard it merge into one. But basically, that's proof that the first instance in the book is actually looped from the second instance, which means probably Adams just read it with the section typo the first time, and it wasn't him, it was rather the editors who caught it and decided to fix it. So if nobody has applauded them for their efforts, here I am 34 years later. Good job, folks. The next original error comes late in the book, in Chapter 31. Zaphod speaking.
Our guests here have been gassing us and zapping our minds and being generally weird.
This is wrong. The mice are not guests, they are hosts. And this becomes more clear with Arthur's retort in his next line.
Hosts? Said Arthur. What hosts?
Oh, well, said Zaphod, attacking a boneful of grilled muscle. Our hosts here have been gassing us and zapping our minds and being generally weird.
Well, our hosts here have been, gassing us and zapping our minds and being generally weird.
Before diving into the American localization, I need to acknowledge two missing links in my analysis. I have not been able to examine either the original British or American hardcover, both from 1980, and it seems unlikely that I'll get the opportunity anytime soon. For the British hardcover, I've been able to find images of a small selection of pages. The few pages I've been able to examine this way, plus the entry on ISFDB, show that both the Arthur Barker hardcover and the book club editions are 159 pages long, just like the paperback, and they seem to have identical text. We have a similar but slightly more complicated situation on the American side. The first version of the American text was published by Harmony Books in October 1980. I have not inspected a retail copy of this first edition, nor the 10th anniversary edition, but I do have the 25th anniversary edition, which is still for sale. The first American paperback by Pocket Books wasn't released until 1981, and of that, I have a first printing. This, my current pride and joy, is a copy of the somewhat rare 1997 trade paperback. Despite the different footprints and binding types, these editions are all 215 pages long, and I've yet to find any differences in their texts. And based on an image I found of the first page from that first edition hardcover, I believe these books all contain the 1980 American localization. It gets more complicated with the 1980 Book Club edition, hold that thought. Not everything I want to talk about has to do with differences between the British and American texts, but it will be our starting point as it is the first point of divergence. There are, as would be expected, hundreds of small changes owing purely to localization, mostly spelling and punctuation with a few word substitutions, like flashlight for torch and ballpoint for biro. These are the least interesting changes in my opinion, and in general I won't be talking about them. However, I found a few spots where certain value judgments seem to have been made in the edit, and there we have some interesting talking points. From Chapter 7.
The hatchway sealed itself tight, and all sound was lost bar the faint, distant hum of the ship's engines.
Compared to the American,
all sound was lost, except the faint, distant hum of the ship's engines.
The use of the word bar, meaning to prevent or prohibit, definitely exists in American English, and I prefer Adam's original phrasing. I have no idea why this was changed.
There is some line that resurfaces a lot in our show, which I just adore, which is barring any barring some unforeseen incident.
Well, I think I can say, barring some unforeseen incident, that you will have a very bright future here at E.D. Gronlund.
This next one from Chapter 9 only matters in print.
A computer chattered to itself in alarm as it noticed an airlock open and close itself for no apparent reason. This was because Reason was in fact out to lunch.
In the original, Adams uses a capital letter to personify Reason as a character. The analogy still works without the capitalization, I guess. It's pretty similar to a phrase like logic was thrown out the window. Still, I think the imagery is improved ever so slightly with the use of the capital. But these two small changes pale in comparison to the scandal that awaits in Chapter 9.
5 wild event maelstroms swirled in vicious storms of unreason and spewed up a pavement. On the pavement lay Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent.
Every standalone copy of the Americanized text, except one, foreshadowing, contains the payment typo. This is why I'm so hung up on that 1980 Harmony edition. I really want to know if this is in there. I really have sympathy for the editors. This comes during a sequence where the characters are experiencing infinite improbability, and all kinds of random nonsensical things are happening, like a sci-fi version of Alice falling into Wonderland. It's plausible that the vicious storms of unreason really did start spitting coins at our characters, so once this typo had been made, it could easily hide in plain sight unless someone happens to cross-reference the British original. This typo does not exist in the omnibus versions, nor is it read in Stephen Fry's audiobook, which uses the Americanized text. This might lead you to assume that Fry was reading from an omnibus copy, but that can't be true for reasons we'll get to in a bit. We're good for a while now until chapter 16, where the American version omits a word.
"Computer," said Zaphod, "tell us what our present trajectory is."
This makes very little difference, but I'm nonetheless fascinated at what's going on here. I don't think this is a mistake. Zaphod's line to the computer is once again pulled from the radio play. The second installment ends with the characters arriving in orbit over Magrathea, which the computer announces to them. The next installment picks up with Zaphod and Ford bickering about it.
Is this necessary? Computer, tell us again what our current trajectory is.
This otherwise redundant line is a device meant to remind the listener of where we left off last week. But in the book, the circumstances are different. Zaphod wakes up Eddie and regrets it because Eddie is annoying. We then shift POV before Eddie says anything about the planet. When we pick up 2 chapters later, the again is a non sequitur because the computer hasn't told them the first time yet. But we also clearly skipped a certain amount of time as we changed our focus from the bridge to the narration to Arthur, so Eddie might have spoken off page. On the same subject of deleted words, earlier I called attention to switching flashlight for torch, but in one case in chapter 20, the word was deleted completely.
Zaphod marched quickly down the passageway, nervous as hell, but trying to hide it by striding purposefully. He flung the torch beam around.
Trying to hide it by striding purposefully. He flung the beam around.
It's established a few paragraphs earlier that Zaphod is carrying a torch, or flashlight, so it's not too weird to find Zaphod directing an ambiguous beam around, although I find the visual of him haphazardly swinging a steel girder from out of nowhere pretty funny. Unlike the "tell us again" line, where I can see an editorial justification for the omission, in this case I think it was just a mistake. Another instance of inconsistent capitalization in chapter 25, when the philosophers are addressing deep thought, the word computer is decapitalized even though it's clearly a portion of the machine's proper name. This choice, or oversight, it's actually not clear to me which, is rather overshadowed by another case of word substitution in the same chapter.
So long as you can keep disagreeing with each other violently enough and slagging each other off in the popular press, and so long as you have clever agents, you can keep yourselves on the gravy train for life.
Okay, to slag off is an idiom which doesn't exist in American English. Maybe a substitution is in order then, but I think the context here is clear enough that no North American reader would be left bewildered as to what this sentence could possibly mean. But it was a very different world in 1980. What idioms did we have in the tool belt then?
So long as you can keep disagreeing with each other violently enough and maligning each other in the popular press.
Maligning. Okay. I really take issue with this one. That is an entirely different tone. I mean, even 40 years ago, we had bashing, jeering, knocking. None of those is perfect, but they're closer in tone to slagging than maligning. These 8 instances comprise all the changes introduced in the American localization for which I have commentary. For completeness, a single instance of the word which was changed to that in chapter 17. The word hot dog was changed from 2 words to a hyphenated single word in chapter 20, and dead weight was changed from 2 words to 1. There you go. The original American paperbacks were published by Pocket Books, an imprint of Simon & Schuster. They went through many printings, the last of which being in 1991 per ISFDB, just shy of 10 years after the original Hitchhiker's print. Then, in the mid-90s, new paperbacks with a new page count and different internal layout were released by Ballantine Books, and later Del Rey, both imprints of Random House, who also controlled the hardbacks. Since the mid-90s, this has been the American mass-market paperback. It's been released with 4 different covers, and the movie tie-in has 100 pages of extras related to the development of the movie. But beyond that, the text appears to be identical. They are 216 pages long, and I've not found a single discrepancy between them. They all contain the payment typo, and on page 93...
Ford hunted excitedly through the technical specs of the ship, occasionally gasping with astonishment at what he read. Clearly, galactic astrotechnology had moved ahead during the years of his exile.
Ford hunted excitedly through the technical specs of the ship, occasionally gasping with astonishment at what he had missed during the years of his exile.
I don't see how this could have been an accident. So, why did they do it? I have one idea, but it's not fully satisfactory. The offending line lies at the bottom of the page, and it goes right to the edge, and the final page in this chapter is nearly full. If you restored the original line, it would carry over onto the next page and cascade down, offsetting every other page in the chapter, possibly pushing the final line of the chapter onto a whole new page. That means you'd have to redo the setting for the entire book if you restored the line. This explanation only makes sense at all if they'd already somehow locked into a page count before discovering the problem. But however it happened, despite my love for the cover art on the original, the American mass market paperback is, and continues to be, the worst edition of Hitchhikers according to my value system. Increasingly inaccurate indeed. This partially deleted sentence, by the way, is how we know that Stephen Fry was reading from this text specifically, which means someone at some point took the time to correct the payment typo on that manuscript. This, plus the omnibus text, demonstrates convincingly that the publishers know about this typo.
Do you know?
Do I know what?
I think you know.
No.
Given that, the fact that it remains uncorrected in the reprintings from 1995, 1997, 2005, 2009, 2017 really irks me. I'd like to think one superfan in the last 30 years would have had the pull needed to say, hey, if you're going to commission an embroidery shop to make a custom towel for the new cover, could you fix this? Now, I might slag off some of the American localization, but one thing it has going for it. Over the last 40 plus years, the text has been remarkably stable. The omnibus versions are, to my knowledge, perfect reproductions of the American localization. Editing note, that ain't true, more at 11. Although my inspection of them has been admittedly limited. You don't say. The retail standalone copies all have the payment typo, and the mass market paperback from the 90s and later has the partially truncated sentence. That's it. Almost. Remember what I told you to hold that thought? This is a book club edition of the original hardcover. Book club editions were printed with cheaper paper and lower quality binding and are rarely of any interest to collectors. However, based on the gutter code inside the book, by all indications, this is part of the original November 1980 book club print, only 1 month newer than the retail. The page count is different, 209 versus 216, and the footprint is a little larger, and the fancy font on the first chapter letter is missing. This print does not have the payment typo. And it's the only American edition that I've ever found that corrects the hosts versus guests error from the British original. I do not have a satisfying narrative here. This is why I desperately want to be able to check that October 1980 retail copy. If that has the payment typo and the guest error, which I suspect it does, then this physically low quality copy carries, by my metric at least, the highest fidelity version of the Americanized text, and the publishers seem to have forgotten about it. Their notes got lost, then found, subjected to public inquiry, lost again, and finally. The American text might best be summarized as flawed but stable. Meanwhile, we have relative anarchy in the UK. Things are simple for a while. Best I can tell, the original Pan paperbacks and their 1980s reskins are identical. According to Nemo, the 1986 Heinemann Pan 4-volume omnibus corrects both the section error and the host guest error, making this edition of the text arguably perfect. Alas, as with the American Book Club edition, few lessons were learned. The early 2000s commemorative editions remain the last UK mass-market paperback set to get a full release, although there was a later movie tie-in and the Pan 70th Anniversary edition, both for the first book only. These share the same footprint as the originals, but the page count and font is different. My analysis here is somewhat complicated by the fact that I do not own the commemorative edition of Hitchhikers, but Nemo does, and I trust his notes. The commemorative set was released alongside the UK's first trade paperbacks, both in 2002, shortly after Adams' tragic passing. These books use the same layout, just at different scales, with Hitchhiker being 180 pages as opposed to 159 in the original. If you're familiar with my cover ranking video, you know this is by far my favorite cover, and favorite presentation of the book overall. And that makes me all the more upset that these first 21st century prints from the UK seem to be the genesis of about 10 small changes, and after careful consideration, I think I dislike 9 of them. Unlike the American texts, a few of the changes have flip-flopped during subsequent re-releases, and in at least one case, different print runs of the same edition. I haven't been able to check the 2016 trade paperback edition, which sucks because there are differences between the 2009 crushed edition and the 42nd anniversary edition, and I don't know if this represents a transitional fossil or not. While I was able to talk about the American permutations more or less chronologically, with this tangled web of unstable edits, here I kind of have to talk about the last 20 years of Pan's printing all at once. Let's do this. From Chapter 1.
They often wish that people would just once and for all work out where the hell they wanted to be.
Maybe there's some prescriptivist grammar rule dictating that want is the correct tense here, but I don't care. I prefer wanted. Alright, who's ready to talk about gender-neutral pronouns?
Each of the contestants would then concentrate their will on the bottle and attempt to tip it and pour spirit into the glass of his opponent.
Benefit of the doubt to the editor, further down in the same paragraph, Adams uses his to describe the action of the drinker, so this could be an attempt to just keep the pronouns consistent. Adams uses their to describe a group of at least 2 people, and to top it off, he's talking about aliens where the gender binary may not even apply, so although I'll admit it's tiny, I really like the version of the pronoun that is ambiguous in both gender and number. Chapter 3.
Damn their fun! He hooted and ran out of the pub, furiously waving a nearly empty beer glass.
Hooted turns into shouted. Possibly error because there's some shouting right here. I actually like the word shouting because in my vernacular, a hoot is something an owl does, but I think it's also pretty clear that Adams' intended word here was hooted, and the change doesn't help the text.
The barman cleared his throat. He heard himself say, "Last orders, please."
I'm even more puzzled about this one. I did some checking on my own, and to check one's throat in this context does not appear to be a valid idiom. Chapter 4.
His fair tousled hair stuck out in random directions.
This one's kind of fun. These 2 adjectives describing Zaphod's hair have changed places. English has an absolute way to order adjectives based on what quality they describe, and it's not something we're ever explicitly taught, but native English speakers just know it. It's why a big blue house works, but blue big house sounds off. With that in mind, let's substitute messy for tousled and blonde for fair. Messy blonde hair sounds more correct than blonde messy hair, right? And the adjective chart agrees. But it doesn't say blonde messy, it says fair tousled. And don't you think the original sounds better?
He lifted his heads up to the sky, let out a wild whoop in major thirds, threw the bomb to the ground, and ran forward through the sea of suddenly frozen, beaming smiles.
Zaphod's 2 heads are hooting in musical harmony with one another. I can only see this as a mistake, and it appears Pan agrees because it is our first unstable change. Per Nemo, it reverts in the 2005 movie tie-in edition, which I don't own, but it stays back to the original thirds in the 2009 edition, verified by me, and the 42nd anniversary edition, verified by both of us, on 2 different print runs. But we're not done yet. The change is back in the 2021 illustrated version, both the American and British prints. Chapter 5.
If they don't keep on exercising their lips, he thought, their brains start working.
A deleted instance of the word on, possibly justified in that the first half of the comparison uses keep here and keep on below. This seems to be a thing, by the way. Assuming these changes were all intentional, this anonymous editor seems very concerned with keeping phrases parallel and other niche grammatical concerns that may be technically correct, but in a work of popular fiction, especially previously published and well-known fiction, I just don't see the value in changes like this. I wasn't joking when I said I hear Adams' prose as musical, and this feels like someone taking out grace notes and accents so that it more closely adheres to classical form or something. Like someone who can tell you what a major third is, but not why you might use it. Chapter 11. The 2005 movie tie-in and the 42nd anniversary omnibus correct the original section error with sector. And for the second time, the notes got lost because all the trade paperbacks, plus the illustrated edition, retain the error. Chapter 16. A change that seems unique to the illustrated edition. Eddie the Shipboard Computer's line, "A real pleasure, feller," changes spelling to fella. In the original radio scripts, the line uses the fella spelling. This means the 2021 illustrated edition's restored, however tiny and inconsequential, an original line for the first time since 1978. This is more akin to an alternate spelling and not really noteworthy if you read the line with a non-rhotic accent, such as Adams' own English accent.
"A real pleasure, fella," it burbled.
But in every dramatization, Eddie speaks with an American accent.
"A real pleasure, fella," it burbled.
"A real pleasure, fella. A real pleasure, fella."
Guys, it just blows my circuit to tell you that we're currently in an orbit at an altitude of...
And then it matters. Chapter 17.
Zaphod tried to run in several equally decisive directions simultaneously.
Another deleted preposition seemingly in error. I think the sentence flows better with the in. Chapter 20. In the latest omnibus and illustrated edition, hot dog is now one word. To be fair, it might be in the paperbacks as well, but in those prints the word happens to line on a line break, so it appears hyphenated as in the American version. Chapter 26.
Allow me to invite you to my study, where you can experience the events yourself on our censor tape records.
The word our has been erroneously changed to your. This seems to be a known error because it's proven to be the least stable change of all. Every time the editing Vogons destroy one, it pops back up in a parallel edition. Strap in, folks. The commemorative edition and the first print run of the 2002 trade paperback have it, but it's corrected in later trade printings. Mine's a 28th printing from the box set, and it doesn't have it. It's also not in the 2002 omnibus, but it sticks around in the movie tie-in and the crushed edition. It's fixed in the 42nd anniversary edition, but it's still there in the illustrated edition. It's really a shame that the illustrated edition includes the your typo, because it's one of the few widely available editions that fixes the guest's typo in Chapter 31 from the original. Also in Chapter 31, near the end, they've added the word in front of dead weight. Seems like the editor's operating on the add a preposition, lose a preposition principle. And in Chapter 35, we finally have a change I support.
Zaphod lounged under the small palm tree on the bridge, trying to bang his brain into shape with massive pan-galactic gargle blasters.
Zaphod is pickling his brains. Brains, plural, because he has two of them. How many of these changes were intentional, and how many were mistakes? I'd bet the ones that flip-flop are most likely to be errors. Thankfully, Pan does not have the last word on the subject. The closest in-production print that you can currently get that I'm aware of to Adams' original unmodified text is the Orion Millennium Gallant's SF Masterworks pocket-size hardcover. With a caveat, because of course there is. Between Nemo and I, we've been able to verify the 1994, 2002, and 2012 printings, and these seem to be identical to the 1979 text, with the sole exception of fixing the host-guest error in Chapter 31. The caveat comes in the latest 2023 version. I haven't been able to check it, and for the first time since 1994, the page count has changed. I don't know if this is just a resetting of the same text or if any other revisions or deviations have taken place. The next closest version is Heinemann's nearly definitive hardback omnibus. Like the Orion version, it only fixes the host-guest error, but it has the unique misprint of mislabeling the final chapter 35 as 32. This is now out of print. Other inspected editions from Redditors and Discord members from copies that I don't own, the Folio Society seems to use the 2002 Pantext as a source, with the new cleared versus checked throat error and the original host-guest error corrected. These were verified by Nemo. The 1994 Illustrated edition, on the American side, seems to be the same as the American omnibus text, thanks to oakgreenoak for help there. The British edition, thank you Nemo, is unique in that it uses the pre-2000s UK text, but also uses the 98 million miles figure. Alright, let me crawl out of this rabbit hole and imitate a normal human being for a second. I would bet all these text anomalies are not anything unusual. Find any book that's several decades old, that's gone through dozens of editions and hundreds of print runs in multiple countries, and you'll probably find a good dozen or so issues like this. That raises the question. If you have the ability to correct or amend an existing piece of art, should you? I have really mixed feelings about this. The original 1979 text, flaws and all, made a huge impact on the world. One could argue that this is the version future generations should read. As best I can tell, no one is producing this text for retail sale currently. Every edition has at least one change, intentional or otherwise. These versions are still plentiful enough that I wouldn't say they're in danger of going extinct in the next few decades, but the practicality of reading them is only going to diminish at this point. I guess some of us can look forward to Hitchhikers entering the public domain in 2071. I'm sure a several hundred-page dissertation can and has been written about how there is no reality, everything is a hopelessly compromised copy of a copy of a copy, truth is an illusion, and any notion of an authoritative original anything is at best a coping mechanism to soothe the deranged mind. And I'm sure Douglas Adams could have written a keynote speech of a few thousand words that was somehow more informative on the subject while also being hilarious and comforting. And he did speculate about a self-updating tome of information decades before Wikipedia existed. Now that so much reading for pleasure is done on a screen, we could just beam out corrected versions to every e-reader if it weren't for that pesky copyright. If I were the benevolent dictator of book publishing, I would ban lenticular covers. And next, I would release e-versions of the books with the ability to flip between the British and American localization. For people reading the British text, you could even hotlink or otherwise annotate words that might need context or translation, like biro, with an option to just turn annotations on or off. This is technically trivial, and e-readers can already do things like this. The revolutionary part of my proposal is that this should be a standard feature when you purchase an electronic copy of a published work. Yes, I am blatantly disregarding the rights of large corporations and current international copyright law. Ford Prefect would approve. But in spite of my lofty beliefs, I'm actually still a paper book kind of guy. If that describes you as well, and you somehow made it through this presentation despite having not read the book, first of all, why the hell did you watch this? And second off, the last thing I want is to put someone off reading the books for want of holding out for a better copy. So let me reiterate, if you're a new reader, the best copy of Hitchhikers is the one you can grab now. You never know if tomorrow may bring a fleet of bulldozers outside your bedroom window. But if you have read the books and it's been a while, or your copies are in shabby condition or whatever, I do have a few soft recommendations. If you're an American, the 2021 Illustrated Edition is the first chance you've ever had to buy the British text from a retailer. No international shipping to deal with or being at the mercy of whatever random used copy may be available. And your mileage may vary, of course, especially if you live in a rural area, but I'm shocked at how many British copies I've found at local used bookstores. And if you're willing to think outside the box a little, the 1990 Grammy-nominated Dove audio recording read by Douglas Adams is arguably the closest to perfect out of any of these editions. This version corrects, whether in the booth or through editing, both of the errors from the original version. And it contains a few unique changes of its own, but honestly I like all of them. Throughout, Adams adds little interjections, things like and oh, in the dialogue that makes it sound more naturalistic.
Well, that's the display department.
He adjusts the prices that Ford pays at the pub.
It's £1.60 if you'd be so kind. Ford was very kind. He gave the barman another £10 note and told him to keep the change.
When I first heard that, I went kind of nuts trying to find the printed version that had those before I decided that it just doesn't exist. And despite adhering to the original UK text throughout, when he gets to the anecdote about the missing biros, the first time he uses that word, he performs his own localization, saying,
obsessed with the problem of what had happened to all the ballpens or biros he had bought over the past few years.
Adams gave unabridged performances of all 5 books, and they're out of print currently, but they're on YouTube, and there's ways to save a YouTube video. So I say, listen to them now, and make an agreement for yourself that if they ever happen to re-release these again for retail sale, you'll purchase it if you can. Everybody wins. By the way, if you couldn't tell, this is Editing Torrent again. My original script had a brief section praising Adam's audiobook read, but I wasn't satisfied with it and decided to redo it. But the main reason I'm here is I wanted to revisit that bookmark I left about the omnibus, and talk about some new knowledge that's come to light since my first recording session. So I'm hoping my timing for this video is good. Since I've been working on it, a couple different Redditors have posted independently asking about typos in the books. The user Axolotly Awesome asked about typos found in the Picador set of the restaurant at the end of the universe, which I confirmed. And another user brought up a typo found in the 42nd anniversary edition of Life, the Universe, and Everything. By the way, it is absolutely my goal to eventually do this same job to the other 4 books and at least get it documented. Whether I do a video project on it or not, depends on a lot of things. In these comments, a third user talked about typos found in Del Rey's latest paperback omnibus. As interested as I am in collecting these books, I'm just not very interested in omnibus editions. The one copy I have is the 1996 hardcover by Wings Books, yet another Random House subsidiary. This one actually belongs to my wife. She had it back in college, and neither of us remember exactly how she first got it. For what it's worth, I've done several fairly extensive spot checks of this version, and I've yet to find any typos or deviations in it. But there are almost as many editions of the omnibus as there are of the standalone books. As this project has worn on, my mental catalog of changes between various editions has grown, and as I found various copies in used bookstores, I've checked for ones that I happen to remember, and on my own I didn't find any. That led me to believe that the omnibus copy of the text was generally clean. But as other readers have found, at least with the newest Del Rey paperback, that is not true. The latest version has its own distinct typos, and because of that, I need to talk quickly about my methodology here. I did not do side-by-side comparative readings of every different copy of the book. I would never finish the project if I did that. I did it once with the 90s mass market paperback versus the 2021 illustrated edition, and then I did, kind of as an extended spot check, read a few chapters out of the 1980 American Book Club edition and the 2002 Picador edition. Once I built the list, I used the other editions just to confirm if those specific instances are there or not. I hope it goes without saying that I'm certain this project is not definitive. Here's what I'd like to conclude, though. In this digital era, I really think the publishers on both sides of the Atlantic are really letting us down, and I want them to step up. And we've got some time here. if these books are ever going to get another physical release, I'm guessing it's going to be for the 50th anniversary. So, Pan Macmillan. None of your editions agree, and by some metrics they're getting worse. Go look at the 1979 text and get it together. Random House. Fix the payment typo, find a way to put that deleted clause back in, and re-examine if some of those changes from 40 years ago are actually necessary or if it's just the sunken cost fallacy at this point. And I can't stress this enough, 92 million miles. If you're unsatisfied with Adam's small error, I'd accept 93, but not 98. Also, I don't want to overstep my bounds here, but maybe do one good cover? This has been Millennial Yells at the Cloud. Thank you. I think it bears repeating. I understand why publishers in the pre-internet era localized fiction to facilitate comprehensibility. But today, if you can buy a book online, you can also read the inside flap to see where the author is from and adjust your reading ear accordingly. And the more people do that, they will, I believe, in some small way, become better citizens of this utterly insignificant blue and green planet orbiting an unregarded yellow sun at a distance of roughly 93 million... Okay, seriously, how the hell did this happen? Here's a theory partially inspired by a comment I got when I first posted about this discrepancy on Reddit about a year ago. Let me set the scene for you. It's 1980. Some diligent, well-meaning, intelligent copy editor is running through the British manuscript, somewhere in the anonymous back offices of Random House, hand-marking the changes to be incorporated by a typist into a new copy of the text, which, after a final editing review, will ultimately head to the printers. The editor sees the 92 million figure and knows this is a little low, so they correct it, circling it with the ubiquitous red pen. But instead of writing it out longhand, they just write the digits, 9-3. They trust their typists. They know they'll follow the convention to spell out the number. But there's a problem. The ink smears just a little bit, disguising the 3 as an 8. And this probably isn't true, but it's too good not to be. By the late 70s, ballpoint pens, or should I say biros, had supplanted fountain pens as the standard writing implement. But I have to believe that this smear was caused by a running fountain pen, which the editor was only using in the first place because their biros all kept mysteriously disappearing.
En su órbita, a una distancia aproximada de 150 millones de kilómetros...
What?
Aproximada de 150 millones de kilómetros...
150 million kilometers? The Spanish translation has it right? I'm done. Good night, everybody. This video has been a sister project to my cover ranking video, and in that video, I made so many mistakes. First, the one I care most about, I got the month of Douglas Adams' death wrong. Adams passed away on May 11th, 2001. Getting something so basic wrong is disrespectful, and I'm sorry. Everything else is thankfully just book stuff. No excuses, but I do want to explain. I wanted to discuss the books with some sort of logical flow, and a lot of my research just ended up in the script. Maybe real book collectors have this all figured out, but as I've alluded to a few times, learning exactly when a particular version first went for sale is not always obvious. For example, these prints of Life, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s. Their copyright pages only show the original publication year, 1982 in this case, and their ISBNs haven't changed. But this one, which effectively has the same cover as the original, has a different page count. So if you use one of the several ISBN lookup tools online, there's a lot of ambiguity. And frequently, reseller sites and fan-driven wikis like ISFDB will show you a cover corresponding to a different printing. So with that in mind, by far the biggest mistake, or series of mistakes, I made in the last video was with my breakdown of the American trade paperbacks. And worse still, I did this whole tangent about aesthetics based on incorrect assumptions about when certain covers came out. I considered taking the video down just over that, but I'm much more confident I understand it now, so I hope this is a reasonable compromise. The first American trade paperback was Mostly Harmless in 1993, the year after the hardcover. That's pretty standard. Then, in 1997, the first 3 books got a release using the CGI 42 square covers. The second and third books seem quite rare. I can't even show you a picture. I saw them once on a very old-looking site that was, I believe, in Japanese, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't bookmark it because now I can't find it again. In 2005, the face covers came out for the latter 4 books, of which I only have Mostly Harmless. Same ISBN and page count as the original, but with a different footprint. I don't know why there was no rethemed version of the first book for this run, but based on this image of a purported first printing of the 90s trade paperback, the reverse of this cover used to have a different design, and has the names of the artists. This is the only place I've found those names, by the way. My copy is an 8th printing, and the reverse cover is different. I don't know exactly when it was printed, but it's from at least 2002. The author bio at the end has been updated to the past tense, and the list of Adams' bibliography at the front includes The Salmon of Doubt. I think that explains why this version is somewhat easier to find than the other 2. I suspect it was in print for longer. 2009, 30th anniversary of the book, and the year Owen Colfer's And Another Thing comes out. We get the Deep Space covers for all 5 books, with the first book featuring a foreword by Colfer. This is where I really blew it in the ranking video. I thought these were from the 90s. And it all came down to the fact that if you Google the ISBN for Restaurant and Life, it says they're from 97. This was a real blind spot because even in that video, I talked about this exact issue with other editions. I think this case specifically was exacerbated by the fact that these look like the 90s to me, but knowing that these covers are still being sold now, but also that the face covers were being sold in the mid-2000s and being unable to find example pics of the 42 square covers, I got locked into this incorrect idea about how they must have paused production on these to promote the audiobooks and then put them back into circulation. So that's how it happened. Oh yeah, 2017, the towel cover for the first book only replaced the Deep Space cover, and now the set doesn't match anymore. At some point, the 42nd anniversary decal was added. I never want to talk about these again, unless someone owns a copy of Restaurant or Life with the 42 square cover. Alright, American hardcovers. I did this whole gag about how the original American prints were inconsistently sized. On the paperbacks, it's true that Fish is slightly smaller than the others. I have first printings of all of them, and it's obvious, but I was wrong about the hardbacks. Now, Mostly Harmless is huge. I got that right. We can ignore it. Let's just look at the first 4. This copy of Hitchhiker, possibly the MVP for the whole project, is a book club edition. What I didn't mention, because I didn't think it was relevant at the time, is that these copies of Restaurant and Life are also book club editions. But my copies of Fish and Mostly Harmless are retail. Another forest for the trees moment. It might be obvious what's happening here. The book club editions are larger than the retail editions, so it's not a valid comparison. Fish did nothing wrong. Here's why I didn't catch it. When I was shooting the last video, in my head, I thought this copy of Life was a retail. Because in possibly my greatest used bookstore find of all time, I found these copies of Life, Fish, Mostly Harmless, and the hardback of And Another Thing all at once. And the latter 3 are all first printings of the retail edition. And then there's Life. But in my head, I grouped them all together since that's how I found them. That, plus the state of the paperbacks, primed me to think that Fish was always the odd one out. If you're actually paying attention, retail editions and book club editions are easy to tell apart, but I clearly wasn't. That would be a really bad look for me because I did a whole bit on it. But I got lucky and actually found a retail first print of Life, and it's smaller than Hitchhiker and Fish. So if you find and replace which book I made fun of, The spirit of the bit is still valid. Aha! Alright, last two, picking up the pace. I said the commemorative editions came out in 2005. That's wrong. They were first released in 2002 alongside the Picador editions. Again, the copyright pages are useless, so with nothing else to go on at the time, I went off the ads, which themselves show a 2005 date. But I found this copy of Restaurant by pure luck, and it doesn't have the ads. And then I just actually paid attention to ISFDB, which is what I should have done in the first place. Same deal with my least favorite American prints, but more subtle. In fact, I'm still not entirely sure here, so this bit comes with an asterisk. In the last video, I talked about the movie tie-in as if it were its own thing, and the purple cover of Hitchhikers plus what I call the Twilight Zone covers because of the font, as if they were a full set. I also pointed out that sometimes the Twilight Zone covers use the 3D movie graphic across the top, and sometimes it's the simplified 2D version, but I didn't get the significance. Here's what I think is a more accurate sequence. The Twilight Zone covers with the movie graphic were released in 2005 as a companion to the movie tie-in, and I have evidence. For some reason, the ISBN of Mostly Harmless changed in this edition, and because it changed, the print run counter reset, and this is a first printing. So I believe this was actually printed in 2005. I think the purple cover of Hitchhiker and the Twilight Zone covers with the 2D logo went into print after Del Rey retired the movie tie-in, but I don't know when that was exactly. This copy of Hitchhiker and Restaurant both say copyright 2005, but I know these particular copies were printed several years later, because in the ads, they're using the 2009 through 2012 version of the Facebook logo and the 2010 through 2012 version of Twitter. So these particular copies were printed sometime between 2010 and 2012. As to how early exactly these versions of the covers were released, I don't know. Okay, I think that's everything.
Far out in the uncharted backwaters of the unfashionable end of the western spiral arm of the galaxy lies a small, unregarded yellow sun. Orbiting this at a distance of roughly 90 million miles...
You're killing me!